All right, guys, here we go. This is story time number 5. Here we go. Let's talk about it. Man, I'll tell you what, there are protests that are taking place all over these United States of America. There's a lot of them taking place worldwide as well. And what's happening? People are protesting the current administration. Like I said, I try to stay out of politics. I'm not standing on the Republican side. I'm not standing on the Democratic side. I'm just trying to just talk about these things, how it may relate to you as an individual or as a business owner somehow, some way. And so, like I said, people right now are planning protests all over the United States. And one of the things that's really interesting that they're trying to do and they're trying to push is they're talking about not filing your taxes. And so this may actually be already happening because they're reporting right now that tax filings are down with the Treasury, roughly down about 14% or so. And if you guys aren't aware, the one thing that happens is the United States brings in roughly about $5 trillion a year in revenue, and roughly about half the money for the revenue that comes in comes from our taxes that are raised from the individual citizens and people that owe tax to the United States. And so as we talk about protests, the one thing I want to say, and I want to kind of tell you a story here about protesting. For the most part, protests don't work. If you look at history, there's only a few times where protesting actually worked. And how can you measure the effect of protesting? Is that if there's any types of lasting change, there's a difference in policy or whatever it might be, then you have a successful protest. I'm not going to tell you guys what protests have been successful or what you should do to protest, but just know that most of the time when people do protest, nothing really happens. And now I'm going to tell you guys a story about the time when I was an external auditor. This was early on in my career, and we were responsible, the team I was on, we were responsible for auditing the city county of San Francisco. So we essentially posted up for months on end at City Hall. And I'll tell you, this was early on in my career. Every day, multiple times a day, there were tons and tons of protests that took place out at City Hall. And you got to remember, the time when I was doing this work, it was a little bit after 2000, early on in the year through 2001, the next year. This was right after the dot-com implosion. Things were pretty chaotic. You know, a lot of people lost their jobs. You know, we had this brand new technology, which was the internet, that was supposed to bring all these benefits to people, and it didn't necessarily do that. Kind of similar to what you might say we have a budding technology now that's kind of on the working its way through our system, which is AI. So very, very similar. It's like I said, protests happened when I worked there all day long. Folks would pull up, they would drive around the City Hall, they would honk their horn, they would gather on the steps, they would yell, they would scream, they would have bullhorns. And you know what happened? Inside of City Hall, nobody paid attention. Nobody cared. Mayor Willie Brown was in effect at that time. He had his own secret entrance in and out of the that was underground for the City Hall, and so nothing really ever happened at all. And I remember there'd be taxi cabs that would show up at noon, and they'd drive around the building for an hour, honking their horns. And what happened on the inside of City Hall? It was business as usual. Nobody really cared. But people had a mechanism where they felt like they were trying to make a difference and make a change. But in the end, they weren't really doing that at all. And so I say all that to say, when it comes to protesting, just be aware that it may not always give you guys the results of what you're actually looking for and what you're hoping for. And so now all of a sudden you've decided you want to turn around and become a tax resistor. Congratulations to you. Now, if you're messing around with the federal government and the Internal Revenue Service, and you don't want to pay your taxes at all, you don't want to file them all, and you're not trying to get involved in one of these illegal schemes, you're just simply resisting for the purpose of resisting, I ask you guys, what is your end goal in deciding to do this? Because you got to keep this in mind. If you want to protest and not file your taxes, you got to remember, the Internal Revenue Service is essentially a collection agency for the United States government, and they have almost near unlimited powers to be able to get paid for the money that's actually due them. And if you decide to travel down this route, I've got clients that have spent 10 years of their life trying to recover from internal revenue problems. And so you don't want to get this particular burden on your back and try to have to deal with it. And so you got to remember, like I said, the Internal Revenue Service has unlimited powers, and they can near unlimited powers. They could do almost they want to. So if you don't file a tax return, what can the IRS do? The IRS can simply file a substitute IRS tax form for you, a 1040, and they could send you a bill. And they've got 10 years from the point that they assess the tax to collect on you. And they can use a number of different methods that we can talk about here in a second. And if you are owed a refund and you decide not to file your tax return, once 3 years goes by, you lose your refund. So that's a lot to be up against. And in the meantime, when you don't file your tax return, you're subject to about 7% interest. It varies, on the outstanding tax that's due. I think it's around 7%, 8% right now. You're also subject to failure to pay penalties. This can be up to 25% of the amount that's outstanding. You also have failure to pay penalties as well that are capped at 25%. They're roughly about 6% a year. So you got a lot of things that are adding on to the additional tax because you didn't file. And then after that particular point, the IRS has the ability to escalate. And like I said, they are a collection agency for the United States government. What they typically will do, they will send you a letter eventually, really nice, saying, hey, you didn't file your taxes. Please file them by this deadline. If you don't turn around and file the taxes, the letters get a little bit worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And then eventually they go dark. And then they will come out and all hell begins to break loose. And so what happens, and I'll tell you this, I've seen this happen to so many people, especially working in the accounting industry, where folks that are there in the company, they haven't paid their taxes, and the Internal Revenue Service sends a collection notice to the work to have their wages attacked. And we're required to take a significant percentage that will actually cripple you. And so imagine how embarrassing that would be if you didn't file your taxes and 2 or 3 years down the road, your employer got a letter from the Internal Revenue Service requiring them to withhold taxes. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. And then on top of that too, they're allowed to lien, which is put attachments on all your assets. They can levy your property. And so what might happen is you might have bank accounts, Social Security, you've got money in retirement accounts. They can take all that stuff. If you got a house, they can put a lien on that. They can force to sell on that. So you got to remember, as you protest something like this, what is going to be your end game and what are you actually trying to achieve by that? So ultimately, the question, like I said, protesting oftentimes doesn't bring any type of noticeable change. But if you do decide to travel down this route of resistance and not filing the taxes, what is your ultimate end game? So you ask the question, okay, should I protest? Sure, why not? Go ahead and protest. But I think the better thing to do is to try to find a way to make solutions to make your financial life better and to try to protect yourself. So I would suggest try to earn more money, pay off debt, try to build up an FU fund. And what's an FU fund? That's an emergency fund. They say 3 to 6 months. I think a reasonable amount for a FU fund is where you can literally say, I'm tired of this stuff. I'm out of here. FU, 100 grand, liquid cash where you can access it. And some people that might not be a lot of money. Most of the folks that work these days, that have families and stuff, an FU fund of $100,000 can buy you quite a bit of time to be able to get back on your feet. So like I said, if you decide to protest, go ahead and do what you need to do. I understand that, but just be careful and realize what the end game is if you decide to go down the route of trying to protest and not pay your taxes with the Internal Revenue Service. And I'll tell you guys, I've got many, many clients over the years that have fought long and hard to try to get themselves out of tax problems and issues, and it usually stems from not filing taxes. Don't fall down that trap. Like I said, continue to brace for impact. Things are going to continue to get worse. Be careful who you listen to. And most of all, remember, no one is coming to save any of us.